Hey guys, welcome back to another Architecture Real Talk. In this video, we're going to be discussing concept. Where we left off last time was context. Now, context, if summarized, is you analyzing the local ecosystem. It is you looking at the stratification of social culture, what's going on the site, traffic, any environmental factors, any wildlife, or any recreational things that are going on site, and you taking that into account before you make a sensible gesture or before you create architecture or you place a building on site. Now, an effective introduction of a building onto a site should see local improvement. It should be urging positive development. It should be something that will add to the existing ecosystem. What that means is pretty much that if there is something there like a bus stop that you can feed in with a cafe, you're not demolishing something that already exists. Always see yourself as an additive measure, and you are actually influencing the culture that's around it and amplifying it, bringing more people to it, creating a positive environment. Now, a concept is the idea that makes a building. It is the purpose of the building. Why does this building exist, right? In the real world circumstances, this allows you to argue a good design gesture. This allows you to argue a point of why this building exists. Why should my client spend an extra $1 million or $100,000 to realize this dream? Well, this will accomplish the highest high-rise or the highest condominium. Could be one gesture, or it could be this is effectively a symbol by which the skyline would be defined when we're talking about high rises. Or this is where people will gravitate to. This becomes a landmark. This is an iconic design. This is what sustainability looks like when it comes to a house or condominium. And that's what it is used for in the real world. Now, when it comes to it being influenced in the studio culture, right? The way I see concept, it is the ability for it to inform every aspect of design. This is something that you revisit time and time again throughout your design process. Am I using the right material to inform this concept? Am I placing the program right where it needs to be? Is the flow right where it needs to be able to do what I want it to do, right? And it brings relevance to the building. It brings coherent design thought to the building. It gives you a way to argue your point when you come in front of a client that doesn't understand idea. How I feel like it effectively gives you a tool by which you can back up your design, right? And there's multiple examples of great concepts in the past. One of the things that I want to point out is, let's say, even if you're looking at product design, let's look at an iPhone again for this particular example. When the first iPhone was created, remember in the past, we used to have this bulky iPod, and we ended up shrinking that down to a touchscreen over a span of a year. When that design was formulated by Steve Jobs, he just wanted a touchscreen. He wanted the ability for a user to directly interact with what's there. And it needed to be thin enough, light enough to fit in someone's hand. Now, when that concept was realized by the engineer, it was still that bulky. We still had fatter processors, transistors, capacitors that were limiting this ability to shrink. And Steve Jobs walks over to an aquarium and drops that iPod in, effectively ruining the only prototype for the AirPod, or what's known to be an iPod now at that time. Every engineer in that room, about 20 to 30 people, all freaked out because that was their only working prototype. And as they freaked out, he said, look, there's bubbles inside this thing. That means there's air, which means we can shrink it down even further, which means the design was pushed just to realize the ability to just hold something light. Now, in architecture, it is similar. That dialogue is still there, but it's a far harder connection because it's not a user app capable device. It is hard to visualize a concept in a building because of the fact that you're not able to relate into the building. And one of my key things is when I tell my students is if you want to be able to relate to your building, walk through it. Even if you create a model, walk through it. If you have a study model or a quick 30-minute model, keep your eye right at where the eye line would be if you were at that scale, and look at the model very closely. Be very precise with what views you see in that model. Now, some of the concepts you can explore are, for example, were very popular nowadays. I guess I'll give you like 4 or 5 that you can reflect on. For example, one of the concepts that comes to mind is biomimicry. Biomimicry is effectively you looking at life. You're looking at termites, you're looking at ant colonies, you're looking at how the animal kingdom itself creates buildings. How do they co-inhabit one space, right? And you can examine how temperature plays a role. You can examine how different societal relationship between those ants or animals or insects or arthropods create those type of relationships. And you can mimic that in human behavior. You can call it the honeycomb, you can call it, and this is pretty much where biomimicry takes you to. Then the more effective or an easier way to argue your point is always go with a public-private type concept. This type of a concept pretty much is arguing to weave seamlessly into the existing fabric of site. You are effectively controlling how people proceed through the building, where they stop due to security clearances, due to their usage, due to where they're allowed to go. And user by user, you can differentiate how this user uses this building. And that is essentially what a public-private concept is. There's some people allowed in your bedroom, possibly your spouse and children, and then others that are guests that cannot be allowed there. And how do you control that? Another type of a concept that it comes to mind is light as a concept. And you know, Louis Kahn said it best that you didn't know how beautiful a building was until it was placed under light, until it was hit by light, right? Light as a concept is explored by Fay Jones in his church that is placed in the middle of the forest, and you're effectively studying how the sun affects the interior of this building. You can look at how the Young Museum filters light to create an effect that is pretty much as if the building is always under a shade of a tree. And this is how you play with light. And then a step beyond that is a sensorial or a perception type concept. This is when you are trying to captivate the user by all senses. What I mean by that is you're trying to control how this person walks through. What do they smell? What do they see? Do you plant a specific flower in this location? Then you're also placing natural material, mud or certain types of material that a user engages with and is one with the landscape. He is one with that identity of that city or that identity of that cohabitation, or even if it's in a suburban area, that landscape is significantly different if you were to be in Arizona versus you were in Colorado versus you were in Texas. Completely different environment. And then you're trying to bring that sensory aspect to it, and that becomes a very powerful concept. And then I guess the fifth concept that comes to mind is like an abstract gesture or an abstract statement that could be a simple gesture that starts from, let's say, something that is a piece of literature. A very, very prime example of this is Bjarke Ingels. All of his work can be explained by pretty much an elementary school kid. It is the ability to communicate a very, very simple idea, carry it very simply through construction documents, and bring it to fruition in its absolute simplicity. You can see this in many of his work. That is pretty much a concept where that starts with a box or a simplistic shape, and he massages it, shapes it, makes a gesture that is pretty much concept, which is context driven. He's analyzing the site, and boom, instantly that building becomes very unique. You can look at his bunker design that he has done. There's several buildings that you can look on his big.dk website, and you will see beautiful architecture. That pretty much is 5 different concepts. If I was to give you an example of a building to just bring this home, a building by UNstudio was constructed in 1993 called the Mobius house. And the Mobius house pretty much is a inverted concept. It is looking into the building. It understands that you're surrounded by a forest and there's not much there. So you are literally looking into the site, and what you have is a family that revolves 24 hours a day between working, sleeping, and eating. And what he wanted to capture in that house was the ability for a family to switch into any one of those roles instantly, right? The ability for that surface to continuously move around and become interior partitions all derives from the idea of that continuation of 24-hour loop. Work, eat, sleep. Work, eat, sleep. And that continuation is captured within the Mobius house by not only its physical gesture, but it is also captured by the way the spaces flow together. At any given moment inside any of those spaces, you're able to work. You're able to have this interesting dialogue between the nature and what is inside. You have this constant kaleidoscope of no idea where you're on the first floor, the second floor, or the third, because you're moving through a mathematical Mobius strip. And that pretty much concludes what I have to say about concept. Please tune in for another time, and like, subscribe, and comment below. Follow for more content.